It is our pleasure to welcome you to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Columbia.
The church nurturing spirit and service.
Whatever the faiths you have known,
or the flags of your heritage, you are welcome here.
To find out more, go to uuchurch.net, and we look forward to seeing you next Sunday.
Kensho Furuyama is an established master of Aikido. He has been teaching for more than 30 years. Actually, when he wrote the words I'm about to read, he had been teaching for 30 years at that time. That was about 15 years ago. His book, Kodo, Ancient Ways, is his discussion of what it is to be an authentic martial artist. Today's opening words are an excerpt from that book. 2 kinds of compromise. We often think that the only way to live is by compromise, and in the strictest sense, this is so. But there are 2 kinds of compromise. One type is the moment-to-moment dynamic action of blending our thoughts and actions with our environment and the people around us. The other is a form of surrender or escape, where we lack any energy or will to struggle through our goals, aspirations, and dreams. Most of the time, we make compromises out of personal convenience, greed, or laziness. One Zen master said, "Nothing goes the way we think it will." We continually meet barriers which block us at every turn. At least it seems so in our day-to-day lives. Yet this is the world where we live, and this is where we must carry out our training. It shouldn't be any other way. To say that the world doesn't go the way we want is not an excuse to surrender or become negative about our lives. It means that we must become aware, alert, sensitive, resourceful, caring, and compassionate from one moment to the next. Indeed, this is the goal of martial arts training. This is what I hope everyone will read again carefully, again, and not misunderstand. It means we must become aware, alert, sensitive, resourceful, caring, and compassionate from one moment to the next. This is, indeed, the goal of martial arts training.
The keen edge of the sword is brought out through its polish. The sparkle of the diamond is brought out through its polish. The brightness of a mirror is brought out by its polish. The beauty of the human being is brought out through its polish.
All right, I'd like to point out a couple of quick things about this clip. First, notice that we are to understand that martial arts must be practiced with emotional content, which is not anger. Those 2 things are often confused, but there is a very big difference between the 2. A true martial artist understands that to fight in anger is to ensure that you will lose your battle. The mind must be unclouded, or all the training one has done will simply go out the window once the fight begins. Secondly, I love the part about the finger pointing away to the moon. How many times do we focus on the finger? How many times do you focus? How many times do I focus on the finger? It's the same as focusing on the obstacle rather than the goal. In training, I was taught that if I didn't spend my time visualizing where I was going, all the actions I was taking had no meaning. And I don't know about you, but I really don't want to miss all the heavenly glory. A bit more background about the movie. This film is about a wealthy man who invites a number of martial arts fighters to his island, and he's having a martial arts tournament there. There are a number of reasons for this, but suffice it to say he has a large martial arts complex on the island, and he wants to see how his fighters will measure up against the best that the world has to offer. All of these invited fighters ride out to the island on a boat together. It takes the better part of a day. Not all of them are nice people. One in particular is a bully, and he spends the entire ride out terrorizing the poor young men who are the ones who are working on the boat, trying to make sure that they get to the island. Eventually, the boys don't provide enough of a challenge, and he seeks out a greater challenge. And that leads us to this next video clip. So as we can see, martial arts is not always about fighting. It is, however, about sizing up your opponent, finding his weakness and exploiting it. In this case, the bully's ego was his greatest weakness. All Bruce had to do was get him into the boat and then let the boat trail behind what they were on to remove everything that was a problem. Bruce's character recognizes the weakness of the ego in the other and acts accordingly, winning the battle, as he says, fighting without fighting. Our last clip is from a movie called The Last Samurai. It stars Ken Watanabe and Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise's character is an officer in the U.S. Army who is sent to Japan as a military advisor to assist the Japanese army in defeating an uprising. The uprising is led by Katsumoto, played by Ken Watanabe, who is a samurai who also happens to be the leader of his mountain village. In the first battle between them, Tom Cruise's character, Captain Algren, is taken prisoner by Katsumoto. He's taken to the small village where he is held captive, and while he is there, he has a chance to learn about this very different people and a different way of living. In the clip we are about to see, Katsumoto has asked Captain Algren to meet with him in a courtyard surrounded by trees in full bloom with cherry blossoms, cherry trees and their blossoms. Algren arrives coming from the home of the family that is giving him room and board, for lack of a better term, a family that does not want him there, which makes his life a little bit more difficult. As this scene opens, Katsumoto has received information about Algren and how he has been dealing with his captivity and wants to discuss it with him. This clip takes place partway through that conversation. I have to admit, I have a man crush on Ken Watanabe. And then I come to this place of my ancestors, and I remember, like these blossoms, we are all dying. Life in every breath, every cup of tea, every life we take is the way of the warrior. What a powerful message. I'm going to invite you into a moment of meditation, and martial arts meditation is a little bit different than anybody else's meditation. The purpose of this is to actually get your body into a place and to regulate your heart rate and get your body into a place of peace and get your mind completely clear so that when you step into a situation where you're facing an opponent, you can do so, to train your body through breathing and relaxing so that no matter what the situation is, you can, in a very short period of time, get yourself into a place where you can assess the situation and act. So, martial arts meditation, we do it a little bit differently. First, I'm going to ask, number one, put your feet completely flat upon the floor, your feet straight out. If you have shoes on, feel free to take them off and get your feet in touch with and in contact with the ground. Secondly, make sure your back is perfectly straight up and down. Nobody sits perfectly straight up and down for very long. We all tend to slouch a little bit and round our backs. Now, when you start to breathe, each breath should be very deep and take a long time. The way that we envision this is imagine your body as an empty vessel, an empty vase. And as you breathe in, imagine a golden liquid starting at the base of your feet and pulling up through your body all the way up and filling yourself up until your head is full. And then as you exhale, imagine that golden fluid flowing down through your body and all the way out until nothing is left in your body, so your breath is completely and fully exhaled. And when you breathe out, don't be shy. Make noise. You breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. So let me demonstrate. And it's not a race. You're not in competition with the person next to you. If you match breathing with someone next to you, that's fine. If you don't, breathe in and of yourself. But make noise when you breathe out. I should hear you. If I don't hear you, you're not fully exhaling. You want your lungs to be as flat and empty as possible at the end of your exhale. So let's try. With your feet on the floor. Breathe in and breathe that golden fluid. Bring it all the way up through your feet, through your legs, through your hips, through your torso, all the way up to the top of your head. Open your mouth and let it out. And feel it drain out all the way down, and squeeze the last few drops out of the end of your toes. And when it's all gone, then the next breath comes in. And so on, and so on. And if you feel yourself slouch a little bit, move your back forward again. Sit up straight again. Imagine a string attached to the top of your head, pulling straight up and lifting you up, holding you straight. If your mind starts to wander, that means your body is out of position. Simply adjust the position and your mind will come back. And don't be alarmed if you feel a little lightheaded. Most people don't breathe this deeply. You're taking oxygen into your body at a level that you may not have done in quite some time. But you will find if you breathe like this in times of stress or anxiety, your heart rate will drop. All of those lovely hormones that run through our body will depress. That fight or flight syndrome comes down. And it's a great way just to get yourself back into a place of peace.
Commitment. People say, "What is the sense of our small effort?" They cannot see that we must lay one brick at a time, take one step at a time. A pebble cast into a pond causes ripples that spread in all directions. Each one of our thoughts, words, and deeds is like that. No one has a right to sit down and feel hopeless. There's too much work to do.
It was the year 2000. I was living in a small efficiency apartment in Santa Monica, California, which is a part of Los Angeles, for those of you who don't know. The apartment was located on the Pacific Coast Highway. It's a little 2-lane highway that runs right down the beach. City on one side, sand on the other. I weighed about 230 pounds, which is about 35 pounds more than I do today. I was a pint-a-day ice cream eating, beer drinking, video game playing, fearful blob. I spent more time on my futon than I did outside, even though I lived right across the street from the Pacific Ocean. Yeah, I was afraid. Afraid of commitment, conflict, confrontation, attachment. Afraid that I was never going to amount to anything. I was 35 years old. I thought a lot about exercise. I never did much of it. I kept thinking I should get my life in order. I had a good job, a cool place to live, good friends, but something was definitely missing. I had no real purpose, no drive, no commitment. And then one day I went to go see a movie and it changed my life. That movie was Gladiator with Russell Crowe. I know. Not the first movie people think of as a life-changing movie, but it was for me. If you don't know, if you haven't seen the movie, it's about a Roman general who's betrayed, left for dead. Through a long and circuitous route, he becomes a gladiator, right? He struggles to find himself. And that struggle to define himself, to redefine himself, to figure out who he is, really touched a nerve in me. In watching it, I was moved. I could identify with that struggle to find meaning in a life that was so dreary. However, I wasn't like my friends. I didn't want to be Maximus Decimus Meridius, the lead character. I wanted to go out and fight with him. I wanted to run up the steps, out on the sand, and be there with him in battle. Somehow I knew inside that I was never going to be a good enough fighter to be that guy. But I could be good enough to be with him and fight with him and be a part of his life. I needed to find a way to break out of the misery of my existence. My inner warrior woke up watching this movie. I knew I needed to do something, anything, to find out if I had what it took to become a strong man or if I was doomed to be this fearful person for the rest of my life. I looked into different possibilities. I looked into boxing, not for me. I tried wrestling. No, that didn't work either. I joined a gym, went once in a while. I went past all these martial arts dojos. I went into some of them, spoke with the people who ran them, and nothing seemed to fit. After a while, I had completely given up hope that I would find anything that would help me become the man I hoped to be. Then one Friday night, I'm playing video games with my friend Vince. He was the dishwasher at the diner we lived above. He lived in one of the other apartments. We played a lot of video games in my place because I had the machine. About 11 o'clock on Friday night, he looks at me and says, "Man, I got to bail." I said, "Why is it every Friday night you got to bail?" He said, "Because I do something on Saturdays." I said, "Like what?" He goes, "Show up and find out." So I did, and my life changed. It's said that when a student is ready, the teacher will appear. Never was it more true than at this point in time. The next day, I climb in a car with Vince. We go out to a small park where we meet with a few other guys. Who knew, who could possibly guess that Vince, this unassuming, young Russian dishwasher with hair long enough braided down the middle of his back, was a martial arts teacher? He ran this class on Saturday mornings, teaching basic Aikido techniques, Jeet Kune Do techniques, and he also taught sword and knife combat. I'd known him for about 6 months and didn't have a clue. By the end of the first class, I knew I wanted more, so I begged him, "You got to teach me." He said, "Fine. We'll go twice a week, 5:30 in the morning. Meet me in the parking lot." So we did, and training began. He taught in a style that's known as authentic martial arts. It's based on ancient ways of teaching. It's not that easy. Much of what we now call martial arts was first taught in feudal Japan, where the concept of the dojo or the school was created. It seems retired samurai needed something to do, so they started schools. A lot of these places were called city schools, a pejorative term, because they taught unrealistic fighting techniques. These samurai who had made their living on the battlefield were teaching people stuff that had nothing to do with anything that anyone would ever do in combat. These people would put their signs out, big, bright signs, talking about their style, the lineage of the person who was their main teacher. But then there were these other schools, these hardcore schools. They were considered to be the authentic places of learning. They had no big signs. They had a little sign. They would have a picture of a sickle and a bowl of rice. And this is a little play on words. The Japanese word for sickle is kama. The Japanese word for rice is one. Together, you put them together as kama one. Roughly translated, it means, come in if you want, we really don't care. They didn't advertise for students. They didn't have to. Students sought them out and found them. That's because in these times, people who strove for mastery of martial arts would search for years to find the right instructor at the right school. In these Kamawan schools, instructors would have only a handful of students at a time. These students were intimately instructed in the forms that the sensei had mastered, so the teacher would spend a lot of time assessing a potential student's aptitude, moral code, ego, personality, before they would even begin thinking about taking them in as a student. The relationship was very close and was driven by the student's desire to learn, unlike today. Training was vigorous, painful, and difficult, but students rarely quit. I mean, after all, where would they go? One of those city schools? In today's world, in many cases, martial arts have become more of a business. The heads of schools have to worry so much about things like rent, utility bills, paying staff. Consequently, the relationship between teacher and student is very different. Students are often given a lot of leeway because the school has to have them to come back so they can continue paying the bills they have to pay. If a student doesn't like the school, all they have to do is go across town. There's always another school. With Vince, there was no overhead. We trained in a parking lot, at the beach, in the park. From him, I learned a lot. I learned a number of different martial arts styles. I learned Aikido, Taekwondo, Jeet Kune Do, the style created by Bruce Lee. I also learned Kendo, which is a sword combat form. But mostly what I learned was more and more about who I was. According to authentic martial arts, the purpose of training is for the practitioner to come to a greater understanding of his or her own self, to come to know who they are, and to learn to express that understanding through movement. And I really did find out about myself. I remember one of my first training sessions, I was doing sit-ups while Vince held my feet. I think I'd done 6. I was exhausted. Vince says, "One more." I said, "I can't." He smiled. He said, "No, one more." I tried. I got about halfway up and fell back. I said, "I can't." He said, "One more, or I'm going to do something you don't like." I did one more. I laid back, relieved. He smiled. "One more." After I'd done about 10 more, saying "I can't" before I did each and every one of them, he looked at me and his best Princess Bride voice says, "You keep saying that word. I don't think it means what you think it means." Then he got this very serious look on his face. And he said, "If you have no idea what your body is capable of, how can you possibly know what you're capable of?" Yeah, it was like that. He was right. It's been said by many a martial arts teacher that training your muscles and training your spirit are two different things, yet they are inseparable. I had found that building and defining the spirit that abides within me was an absolute necessity in order to continue training my body, to push it beyond anything that it had been previously able to do. Vince often said, "Everything is practice." Everything is practice, meaning every aspect of life is a form of training. Sometimes we try to make our spiritual training too spiritual, and it stops becoming spiritual training. When you reach the point where everything you do is a form of training, a form of practice, even brushing your teeth or tying your shoe can be a form of spiritual practice. Practice is as inseparable from life as training muscles is from training spirit. Seeking excellence in everything you do will allow you to do excellent things. If my sensei Vince sounded a little harsh, he was, but I also know he was right. He was teaching me about myself in a way that was startling. I was learning through exerting myself, through attention to detail, that I could learn so much about who I was. And that knowledge was based on reality, on understanding who I really was, not some fantasy of who I wanted to be. One day we were walking along, Vince and I, talking about life, and I started this sentence. I said, "You know what I want?" He cut me off. "How can you possibly know what you want when you don't even know how to walk?" "What? I've been walking for 35 years. What do you mean I don't know how to walk?" He looks at me, and then he says, "Your weight's too far back. You have no front-to-back balance. You use your heel but not the ball of your foot when you take your step. You walk on the outside of your foot rather than keeping your weight in the middle. Your toes are turned way out. They don't face the front. All in all, there's little balance or grace in the way your feet move from one step to another. You have absolutely no awareness of what your feet are doing at any time." Oh. Find balance in your body. You will find balance in your life. Oh, Jeff, while you're at it, learn to stand as well. So let's talk about that for a minute. Learning to stand. When I stand, typically, I stand like this. Hip way out to the side, right? And what happens? Your body's tilted, your pelvis is tilted, there's no balance. All of my weight is on my right heel. It's not even on the ball of my foot, it's on my heel. I sit back, I lean back, right? Standing correctly means you stand on both feet. The balls of your feet and the heels of your feet are both connected to the ground. Your toes point forward, not off to the sides. And when you're standing right, it feels like you're leaning forward. So I want to ask everybody to stand up for a minute. All right. First, feel how you're standing. Are you standing straight up and down, or are you leaning to one side? Turn to the person next to you. And if you're comfortable with them, help them stand straight. If they're leaning to one side, gently move them until they're straight up and down. Most people stand leaning backwards. If they're leaning backwards, gently pull them forward until you can see that they're straight. It feels funny. It feels very funny to stand correctly. All right, everybody have that spot? You have that spot where you feel good? Okay, let's sit back down. You feel like you're going to pitch forward because we stand backwards. We lean back. That's what we do. All right, let's go back to Vince and training. Eventually, my training schedule with Vince looked like this. We did one-on-one training Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, starting at 5:30 in the morning. We went Tuesdays and Thursdays for a couple of hours. Each day, every day throughout the week, 2 hours minimum, I was working one-on-one with my sensei. We spent Saturday mornings with another man, Steve, where we did mostly sword training. Steve, it turns out, was a 4th-degree black belt. He'd been studying with Vince on Saturdays for a couple of years before I started training with him. He was in that group of guys that was there that first day. All the rest of them, as was normal with our training, bailed because it was not for them. Sundays were mine to do with what I wanted. Vince and I did weight training together 5 days a week. And since I lived on the beach, right across the beach, right across from the sand, and my office was 5 miles away, about a block off the beach, I bought rollerblades. And I started blading to work on the bike path on the sand. As you can imagine, relatively soon, I was fitter. I'd lost about 55 pounds. I was getting stronger mentally, physically, and emotionally. I tell you this not to brag, but to impress upon you how important this was to me. How vital training was to my life. But to what end? The physical purpose of training is to learn to move in such a way that you leave an opponent no opening. It is also to learn how to maximize the effectiveness of your moves, punches, blocks, kicks, so that with minimal effort you can create maximum effect. We often say, at the beginning of training, a punch is just a punch. And in the middle of training, a punch becomes so much more than just a punch. And when you finally master it at the end of training, a punch is just a punch. So what does that mean? That means this. At the beginning of training, I'm sorry, the battery is dying on this, so it's going out. So it goes like this. At the beginning of training, a punch is just a punch. You throw a punch. In the middle of training, it becomes this. It becomes make sure your stance is right. Make sure your balance is right. Get sunk down. Get in the middle. When you start the punch, make sure your hands are actually in the right spot before you start to throw the punch. Your punch starts not with your hand, but with your hips. Your hips turn first. So you sink down. You get the hips moving. The hips move, then the hand follows. You need to know how far you can reach so you know where the opponent has to be in order for you to hit them. You also need to know how far your opponent can reach so you can make sure they don't hit you. It's called combative distance, ma'ai. Making sure that you are in that spot where they can't reach you, but you can come back and reach them. All of this goes into training in throwing a punch. Eventually, you get to the point where you don't think about it anymore. That is when the punch, once again, becomes just a punch. Other martial artists, they take the same saying, but they switch out the word flower for punch. At the beginning of training, a flower is just a flower. During training, a flower becomes so much more than just a flower. And at the end of training, a flower becomes once again just a flower. This is because training causes a serious student to become much more aware of everything around them, enough so that even flowers become more than what they were at first. This was my reason for training, to become more awake, more aware, and more alive. In his book, Kodo, Ancient Ways, Kensho Furuyama talks at length about authentic training and what it is. He talks about being a real martial artist rather than an ordinary martial artist. He tells this story about a young man who wishes to become an expert swordsman. He goes to the master teacher and says, "How long will it take for me to become a good swordsman?" And the teacher says, "About 10 years. Well, the young man doesn't like this answer. He wants it to be a shorter period of time. So he says, what if I practice twice as hard? The teacher goes, 20 years. That didn't make sense to the young man. So he said, what if I work harder than anyone else has ever worked in the entire history of the world? He said, it will take you a lifetime. On the surface, this doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. However, if you look deeper, you will see the truth in the answer of the teacher. If one studies swordplay for 10 years, obviously they will become a good swordsperson. However, if they practice extra hard, they will see that what they are in 10 years' time is incomplete. They will see the holes in their technique and wish to continue to refine it. They will see that what they have learned is nothing compared to where they could be in another 10 years. They will not be satisfied if they left training after only a decade. And to devote one's life to the mastery of the sword, as the young man suggests, it would truly take a lifetime to reach the desired mastery level. Even after 20 years of tirelessly working, the practitioner would be able to see where they could improve, what was wrong. Even though it would be minute and tiny, they would still understand that they would never, ever, ever reach a moment where they felt like they absolutely knew it all. This is the way of training as I knew it. Each day was a new chance to perfect what I had already learned, a new chance to build upon that foundation, and at the same time, a new chance to find out more about myself. Training is the place where illusion is cast aside and reality holds sway. To hold on to illusion would be to leave openings to be exploited. And this is not a physical concept only, it's an emotional concept as well. One day, Vince was asked by one of our friends if he used martial arts outside the class. He said, every day. Every day. When you learn to see things clearly, to assess them honestly, and take action based on that assessment, when you realize that everything is practice, it becomes easy to see how the techniques we learned in our training on how to handle opponents could be used in all aspects of your life. Through pushing myself and learning what my true capabilities were, I was being changed bit by bit, day by day. I was questioning everything I thought I knew about myself and found a lot of it to no longer be useful or accurate. I found the things I was accepting of previously were no longer good enough. Physically, I was stronger and more flexible. I was adept at maintaining my awareness no matter where I was. Emotionally, I became someone people could count on. I wasn't before. I could, and I did, reach the ability to commit to things and maintain those commitments. I was becoming a balanced human being. I was learning more and more how to be a spiritual human being, and for the first time, I was setting realistic goals and through hard work beginning to achieve some of them. There are no easy paths to reaching your goals, but that doesn't mean that we as people don't continue to try to find those easy paths. It's important to know who and what we are and where we come from in order to know that what the next steps are, how long it will take to get there. We also need to know what it means to move toward those goals and how to take those steps well once we determine what they should be. And when we ask for help, we really need to make sure the ones we're asking know enough to be able to give us the information we need. Consider the following Japanese fable. A man was walking along a road. He'd been doing so for a while and was wondering how much longer it was going to take him to reach the town that he was trying to get to. He saw an older man sitting by the side of the road, seemingly asleep. The old man was unkempt and dirty, and yet had that aura about him that made the traveler think that this was a wise man. So the traveler stopped in front of the old man, his shadow falling on him and bringing him out of his nap. The traveler asked him, "How long will it take me to get to the next town?" The old man opened his eyes and didn't say anything. So the traveler asks again, "How long will it take me to reach the next town?" The old man just fixes him with a stare and does not say a word. After waiting for a while, the traveler finally gives up and starts to walk down the road. He gets a few steps away and the old man yells out, 5 hours! The traveler stops, turns around and says, "If you knew, why didn't you say something?" The old man says, how could I possibly know how long it would take you if I don't know how fast you move when you walk? I'm no longer able to train the way I did. I have a degenerative disc condition in my spine that has led to surgery on my neck and lower back. There are now days when simply getting up and walking is a difficult thing for me to do. However, the lessons I learned all those years ago still reside within me and still resonate within my soul as I continue to live this life. This is my new spiritual quest, to learn what my body is capable of today, to learn what I can and cannot do, to truly understand the strengths and limitations of my body, and to be able to act within that knowledge. To put that into place, I must look back to the things I have learned through my practice. I have learned that the pursuit of perfection is a worthy goal, but not to become too upset when that perfection is not realized to my satisfaction. I want to go back to the movie The Last Samurai. At one point, Ken Watanabe's character, Katsumoto, is speaking to Tom Cruise's character, Captain Algren, while surrounded by those same cherry blossoms we saw in the film clip earlier. Katsumoto muses, "The perfect blossom is a rare thing. You could spend your life looking for one, and it would not be a wasted life." Later, at the end of the movie, Katsumoto lies wounded and dying on a field of battle. As he lies there, he sees cherry trees in bloom at the side of the battlefield. Captain Algren, also wounded, comes to Katsumoto. As he arrives, the samurai's eyes are fixed on the side of the blossoms. Katsumoto's last words are, "They are all perfect." At the end, he comes to the realization that in this moment, all things have their own perfection. In training, a good sensei will tell their student that although there are things that are not absolutely correct in a student's performance of a technique, the student's mastery on that day can be perfect. It is not the perfection the student will achieve in the next day, week, month, year, or lifetime. But it is truly, if it is truly what they are capable of in that moment, on that day, it is perfect. I have learned to look at things realistically, to honestly assess them in order to be able to determine what I need to work on in order to improve. I've learned to be balanced. I've learned to be both hard on myself and yet gentle with myself. I have learned to let today's effort be perfection and yet still strive tomorrow to find ways to improve it. And yes, I'm still learning to walk. It seems that is a lifelong process. For my closing words, I want to go back to the opening words that we used. The goal of martial arts training means we must become aware, alert, sensitive, resourceful, caring, and compassionate from one moment to the next. So may it be. If you rise and join hands so we can sing the benediction.